Good evening, everyone.
I think we have a video. Sorry, Debika. I think,
Yes.
Yasti, we have a video to play before we all come in.
Nina?
Good evening and welcome, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you see me? Okay. So welcome to the final day of GTPS, the Global Tipping Point Summit 2022. This summit has turned out to be absolutely inspirational. The speakers at the summit have been magical. I know I'm using superlatives, but there's no other way. We started on day one with Ms. Carolyn Shaw from the UK setting the tone of GTPS with questions, a whole lot of questions on our approach to education. And she made us rethink that. Then came in Dr. Ranjani Krishnaswamy, who spoke on the 21st century skills that leaders need to possess. We then had Ms. Shrija, who has done some amazing work in rural Karnataka and has worked with government schools and has done a lot in the field of assessment. And we concluded the first day with a panel discussion hosted by Dr. Atul Nischal on moving from formal to informal assessment. On day two, we began with two panel discussions. We began with Education Through Nature, chaired by none other than our beloved conservationist, Bittu Sehgal. Some amazing ideas came through during that session, and that was followed by Education Through the Arts. The whole idea is that we do not see these as separate, but we teach the basic concepts and life skills through arts, through nature, etc. The third session was again a very interesting session on teaching through sports and games. And the final session of day two was by Alexander Johnson on digital pedagogy and gamification. Completely changed my own view of gamification. On day three, we began with Mr. Nitin Orion chairing a session on active sensorial play-based learning. The most beautiful part of it is that we've got facilitators who have come in from Waldorf, Steiner, Montessori, Aurobindo, just about all these alternative systems, Reggio Emilia. And that session was followed by a young panel which came in to discuss social justice issues and how we can make our young learners aware of them. So that was chaired by Ayushi Banerjee. And that was followed by another session on inclusivity chaired by Dr. Sujata Ban. And we talked about the whole concept of inclusion and how changes need to be made quite radically. And the day ended with a delightful session on social, emotional, ethical learning. If you have missed any of this, no problem. All the recordings are available on our website, gtpsforchange.org. And today, we again have something very interesting for you. We start with a panel discussion chaired by Ms. Debika Chatterjee on how we need to inculcate ideas of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, and civic sense in young learners. The next session will be on readers will be leaders. The third will be by me, and I'll be talking about the framework, my vision, and how we plan to move ahead. And the final session will be an open mic session. Everyone's invited to ask questions. So if you have questions for the first panel, please reserve them to the end. And do stay with us, because in order to make our vision of GTPS work, we need your help, your collaboration. Thank you very much. Enjoy the proceeds of the evening. I pass on the mic to Dr. Nina Nair, Professor, Walia College, Mumbai. Nina, kindly take over.
Thank you, ma'am. Hello and a warm welcome to Day 4 of the Global Tipping Point Summit 2022. Today, as citizens of a globalized world, it is our sacred responsibility to work towards sustainable development. And to lead our panel discussion today on civic sense and sustainable development goals, it is my pleasure to invite Ms. Deepika Chatterjee. She is an award-winning educationist, international speaker, and director principal of JPCN International School, Mumbai. A very warm welcome to you, Ms. Chatterjee, and over to you.
Thank you, Nina. Thank you, Kumi. And I am proud and honored to be a part of this gathering today. I'm joined by people who have brilliant minds, and they are doing some phenomenal work in their fields. I work in a school, and I believe that the world starts in the schools of today. They used to say that it takes a village to raise a child, and I think the schools of today are the village that helps raise children. In order to look after this world, schools have to value community-based learning, outreach, service, because I believe that by building communities of collaborative learners, we will be building a future that will think about the world as one place. The SDGs help us to achieve this dream of ours, and it is critical to an academic experience that helps define the values which will lead us through this life that we spend on this earth. And I am a firm believer that we have to leave this slightly better than what we found it when we came here. Learning about SDGs opens a child's mind to different communities, experiences that are outside their own. It breeds empathy, and empathy and compassion are at the heart of true leadership. SDGs can be used as a framework to support learners to develop all these 21st century skills that I hear about, and I can't ever understand why we call them as skills needed in the 21st century, because I think these are skills as old as time. They've been there and they will always be needed. If you need to be a compassionate human being, you have to be a collaborative citizen of this world. And I think to take this forward, I have with me the great honor of people who have been doing this work for a long time now. I am joined by Ms. Ritu Malhotra, who's the co-founder of ARC, an education startup dedicated to integrating SDGs in the school curriculum. We have Ms. Anahita Lee, a teacher educator, author, and a curriculum designer. We have Ms. Trupti Doshi, who's been recognized among the top 10 sustainable architects of India, co-founder of Auroma Architecture Design Studio, and international TEDx speaker, a bird watcher, yoga lover, and poet. And of course, Ms. Shamim Padamsi, a renowned author of books for children, founder of the website Young India Books, that reviews and promotes children's books in India. And while I speak to them, I think I will start with my first question for each one of the panelists, which is a common question. And I would like to hear their views on the significance of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals for the global community. If you could start, Ms. Ritu, perhaps we will start in that order, and Ritu, after that, Ms. Anahita, and then Trupti, and then Shamim.
Thank you, Devika. Thank you very much for welcoming us and giving an introduction. It's an absolute delight to be among you all here. About 17 Sustainable Development Goals. We all know that they are a blueprint to make the world a better place. They give us a roadmap to tackle global problems like climate change, extreme poverty, and inequality the world is facing today. Also, the world must come together to solve these problems. That's the most important message. The pandemic has shown to all of us that no one is safe till everyone is safe. Similarly, we can't stop climate change or protect animal species till everyone takes action. Change begins with one action, but when 7.5 billion people do that one thing, it brings about a change on a large extent. So the global community has to come together in order to make the world a better place. So that's my take on Sustainable Development Goals. Over to you, Anahita. Anahita, you're on mute, I think.
Thank you. So just to build on what Ritu has said, I think our times have absolutely shown us that if we are to be safe, happy, others have to be safe and happy too. So taking it from there, what I'd say specifically as a teacher, I think the SDGs are a perfect through line to carry across all learning. You know, today when we are speaking of blurring boundaries between subjects, of integrating learning, it's very hard to find a commonality. So I think the SDGs are almost like a perfect lens through which we can look at all learning and also bring all learning together in a through line. So that's my take on SDGs, particularly as a teacher.
Thank you, Anahita. Trupti, if you could please.
Sure. Thank you, everyone, for having us here. I believe that in the context of what I do since the last 25 years, which is architecture and design and creating the built environment, I believe the SDGs are supremely important, especially in a country like India, because today we have only 30% of the buildings that we will have in 2030. Today, we have only 30%, which means 70% of India, which we will see in the next decade, is yet to be built. So we have to build it sustainably. We have to build it with the 17 sustainable goals in our mind, because this will directly impact the health and well-being of our generation, our future generations, and our communities, neighborhoods, cities, and our planet at large. So this is the very first reason why SDGs are so important. And secondly, they are important because we have to incorporate the triple bottom line sustainable principles of people, planet, and profit in the way we look at development, in the way we look at economic development, because economy and ecology are two sides of the same coin. We can't have one without having the other. So unless we incorporate ecological principles in our economic development, we will always remain lopsided, which will not be a healthy place to live. Because of these two reasons, SDGs are extremely important in our curriculum for children.
Thank you, Trupti. I would like to ask Shamim to share her views, please. You're on mute. You're on mute.
Yeah, I'm coming from a totally different place. We've all spoken a lot about the SDG goals. We know the importance of it all, but I'm trying to understand, how do we excite children about it? What is the role that children can play? Because they are our future. They are the ones who are going to be taking this forward. We have started messing up the planet, and it's for them to resolve it. And I think the best way, the way I see ahead, is to share stories of children from around the world of children who are become aware of these issues, children who are doing some things in a small way, creating small impacts. And if those stories can be shared, I'm looking at how that can happen to inspire others to take up this action to bigger and bigger and better goals. Because it's only when we understand that the possibilities which lie within each one of us, we see the magnanimity of the solution, a problem that's so huge, it seems beyond all of us to resolve. And we feel so little, we feel so tiny, and a child feels even more. But for them, it's very important to resolve and save the planet for their future. And I see that as how we can introduce stories, their stories of achievers, of children, of who have achieved things, to make it possible for them to inspire each other to reach this goal of sustainability of our planet.
Thank you, Shamim. And I do understand that there is a sense of urgency, there is a sense of doom perhaps at times, and stories are needed to take us out of that and inspire us and keep telling us that we can still strive for a better future. I will start with the next round of questions, and perhaps Ritu, you can let us know why is it important for young learners to learn about sustainability, and how does sustainability affect the lives of young students?
So, of course, if we truly want to bring a change in the world, we have to start with children, because these children are the decision makers of tomorrow. So we have to equip them and empower them to bring a change into the world. And it has to be a part of our education system, because what is the purpose of education after all? The true purpose is to make better human beings. So we are focusing too much on math, science, and languages. We want to make our children doctors, engineers, and data scientists. But are we making empathetic doctors? Are we making sustainable engineers? Are we making ethical data scientists? So that is equally or perhaps more important purpose, which we are not able to meet right now. So SDGs is that one tool that can impart value education and socio-emotional learning. We must teach SDGs for the following reasons, and these are 4 reasons I have in mind. One, of course, to introduce children to the global problems which can be taught through the SDGs. 2 is to build empathy and compassion in children by making them understand the challenges faced by different communities in the world. And 3 is to equip them with information and skills they need to grow up to be active global citizens of the world and responsible stewards of the planet. And 4 is to empower them to invent, innovate, and campaign and be the change they want to see in the world. So yes, very important to integrate it into the education system, very important to teach SDGs in the most meaningful manner. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ritu. I move on to Anaita with my next question. How can we effectively implement education for sustainability at school? And what are some activities that parents and teachers could do with young children?
Ma'am, please unmute yourself.
Okay, it's happened. Thank you. So are you able to see my screen?
Yes, Anaita.
Yes, okay. So, again, to take forward what Ritu just said, all of this sometimes, particularly for primary teachers and pre-primary teachers, seems a little too much. These are all large words and advocacy and campaigning and the challenges. So what I'd like to show is how simply this can be done, particularly at the pre-primary level. So the approach I think one could take is not to overwhelm children with all of the goals all at once, but to choose the most age-appropriate ones perhaps, and begin with a few goals, like maybe just 6 at the lower level, and then gradually build both in complexity and number till as you come to the higher grades. Then simplify the language of the goals. So instead of quality education, just everyone will get a chance to learn. Put up little child-friendly illustrations that go along with them. So it's some sort of informal learning for the children, and they get to look at this, they get familiar with this just in simple child-friendly language. An important thing is to have education for sustainable development, not as a sort of separate tag-on extra subject. That's a weak connection. For it to be strong, the learning outcome should be integrated with every other area of learning. And I'll just give you a couple of very, very simple examples. So at the grade 1 or 2 level, if a teacher is doing sort of data reading, a little infographic on how much coloring, on how much fresh water and salt water there is, the proportion of that, color 100 drops and know that you have only about 1 left, will give the child a sense of how precious water is. Just a simple activity like that. With the time-worn story that we do almost in every class of the sun and the wind and how they quarrel to take off the traveler's coat, use that as an opportunity to ask, how is the sun useful to you? What is the power of the wind? And then bring in clean and affordable energy, alternative energy. Similarly, again, if you're doing a bit of art and craft, a little paper plate fish like this. Say, how would you feel if you were living in pond 1? How would you feel if you were living in pond 2? What do you think the fish would say? Just a little exercise like this, a little role play activity like this, and you've got life below water. No child, I think, passes through preschool without learning when you're happy and you know it. That can be used as an opportunity for good health and well-being. You have a bit of movement in the song, and you also have little doodling, drawing, and teachers can use that opportunity to talk about well-being, emotions, what feelings we have, and how we can express them. For zero hunger, just a fun activity like a healthy food maze, taking the girl across healthy and unhealthy foods to the salad bowl. Children can do little gratitude activities like giving thanks for the food they eat and the hands that bring them that food, grow that food, cook it, serve it. Quality education can be done across all classroom transactions with little class pledges like I'm here to learn all I can, to try my best and be all I am, drawing pictures of classroom rules and responsibilities. That's how simple it is. For life on land, we could begin with just a little nature walk where children observe things around them, a campus walk where they observe little things in nature, color, record, and that begins a sort of inquiry and then will lead to empathy. When you're talking of recycling, reusing, it can also be taken to a garden activity of composting. This is now all around us, even in urban areas. And just through these basic everyday activities, we can introduce children to the SDGs. One of my favorite activities is getting children to design a superhero themed on a global goal. So they imagine what they would do with a superpower, how would they achieve an SDG goal with a superpower? And we get lovely examples when we do this with children across schools. A kindness calendar is another simple way a whole class can come together with activities. Simple things like watering a tree, being kind to an animal, letting someone go before you in line, apologizing to someone, or even reusing a sheet of paper. So all of these simple activities could help at the pre-primary level. Another of my favorites is to have a little bee finger puppet, just like this one, so that children can talk about the environment, talk about goals, and think about being the change, right? It's just 3 little rings stuck together, and you have a little finger puppet. So these are just some of the ways in which the SDGs can be a blueprint for our children, because it's something that can communicate across lands and languages, just this universal responsibility, as you said at the beginning, Devika, of the world as one and no one left behind. So these are just some simple ways in which we can do this at the pre-primary level.
Thank you, Anaita. I don't want you to stop. I think I'm waiting to hear about all the other things that we can practice in our classrooms. And we'll definitely wait to hear from you again, perhaps soon. I would like to ask Trupti the next question, please, Trupti. How can we incorporate SDGs, like you mentioned earlier, in our built environment?
I mentioned earlier about the 3 aspects of triple bottom line sustainability: people, planet, profit. We could also term them as environment, society, and economy. And this is actually the sustainability wedding, the SDG wedding cake, where environment is the largest circle at the bottom on which people are standing, and economy is the smallest circle at the top. And the kind of SDGs through our work, through our architectural design work here in my company at Auroma Architecture, we are able to address 10 out of the 17 SDGs through the work that we do. And we have categorized these SDGs based on, one moment. Yeah. Based on whether they belong to the environment, society, or economy. So there has to be a template through which we can spread this message, and we can have more and more people who will incorporate SDGs in the work that they do. So we have developed a very unique template which we have been following over the last 20 years in order to achieve the SDGs in our work. And this is the template. We call it the Auroma's 9-point recipe to achieve the SDGs in building design. So these are: 1, design; 2, climate intelligence. How can we incorporate natural light, natural ventilation, natural heating and cooling in buildings, and completely reduce the load on air conditioning and artificial lighting? 3, materials and technologies. How can we have sustainable materials and technologies which are resource efficient? How can we do more with less material? 4, water. How can we incorporate rainwater harvesting, water efficiency, recycling in all our projects? 5, energy. How do we create energy efficient buildings and also incorporate renewable sources of energy in the design? 6, waste. How do we recycle or upcycle our waste, and how do we give the kitchen waste back to the garden? 7, biodiversity. How can we create living buildings which produce more oxygen than they consume? That is how we can integrate biodiversity within our building designs. 8 is interiors, and 9 is smart systems. In order, by automation, we can also save a lot of energy. So the whole idea of doing this Auroma's 9-point recipe in the design of built environment is to achieve a net zero building. Net zero in terms of water, in terms of waste, net zero energy, and net zero carbon. So here is an example of a building that we have recently finished. It's called the Gratitude Villa in Pondicherry, in which right at the bottom you see all the 9-point recipe. So we have incorporated all those 9 principles in this building design. And for this, we were awarded by the Government of India with the Exemplary Performance Award for Sustainable Development. This is the Minister of Climate Change and Environment, Shri Bhupendra Yadav, giving us the award. And this house ranked first out of more than 5,000 houses that were shortlisted from India and which were able to achieve the highest SDGs in the design and construction. through incorporating this 9-point recipe, we were able to reduce 180 tons of carbon dioxide in the building. So buildings are one of the biggest polluters on the planet. 40% of greenhouse gases are because of the construction industry around the planet. And through this one single building, we were able to reduce 180 tons. Now, just to give you an example, 1 ton of carbon dioxide requires 6 mature trees to fix it. So by building one building responsibly, we have saved 1,100 mature trees. That is the impact of what we can do just by doing the same thing in a responsible manner. So these are the various ways in which we did it. The second example I wanted to give you is of a larger building. It's an institutional building that I have built on a 5-acre campus. And this building has been selected by the United Nations as the model for sustainable development in India. The entire building from foundation to roof is built completely out of unfired earth. And that to the earth on the building site itself. So it's a large complex. We have incorporated the 9-point recipe. This is able to accommodate more than 500 people on this 5 acres. It is a cultural center. So people from all walks of life and all around the world come and use this as a venue for 3-day, 5-day, 10-day workshops. And the way we were able to do it is we did a topographical survey of the site, and the point which was at the lowest contour, we simply dug it out, and the soil that came out of that little pit in the ground, we built the entire 5-acre complex out of that soil. And the water that falls on all the buildings goes back to this pit. So again, we are talking about sustainability through circular design and closing the loops. So the soil became the building, and the water falling on the building comes back to the pit in the ground. So there is a circle, a virtuous circle of soil and water that we have established, of earth and water. We even made our own bricks with that. And of course, as I said, not a single drop of water leaves the entire campus. For those of you who are interested in my TEDx talk in Greece, which was titled, Can a Building Be a Person? I have shared 3 concepts of, can a building be a mother? Can a building be a teacher? And can a building be an entrepreneur? So for those of you who are interested, you can watch the section on Can a Building Be a Teacher, in which I have shared several ideas on how we can incorporate learning aids within the design of the building, such that simply by being in that campus, being in that building, our children are learning. It is not just through teachers or to peer-to-peer, but being in that environment itself should be a learning experience for our students. And for those of you who are interested in sustainable development goals, this is another TEDx talk which you may be interested in. It's called Making Smart Buildings Before Making Buildings Smart. So today, all of us are talking about smart cities or smart homes, and most of it is driven by gadgets. But gadgets should be the last thing. Gadgets should be used only at the end. But otherwise, the building itself should be smart to begin with. And I'll be happy to answer any questions if anybody may have. And I'll be very happy to keep connected with everybody who is interested in sustainable development goals and how we can incorporate them in the built environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Trupti. I was thinking of a number of adjectives. Each slide I thought needed a superlative, the way Kumi was saying, and I think I can end with only one, and that is wow. I don't have anything else to say. I am going to go through each one of your talks and definitely connect with you. I look forward to a longer discussion perhaps soon. In the meanwhile, we move forward and we wait for our super storyteller Shamim, who will tell us how can we use stories to inspire action, and share some insightful stories, please, Shamim, of young global citizens taking charge and achieving success. I know you shared a few with us the other day, but we are looking forward to hearing more stories from you. Thank you, Shiv. I think you're on mute.
Okay, great. Thank you for giving me this opportunity, and I'm so impressed. I'm wowed by what this presentations I've seen. It's amazing. I think Ritu, Anahita, you have inspired me so much with your presentations on how to educate children, and I'm sure it's going to find good results in the future, marvelous results. What I'm going to talk about is the stories which will emanate from these initiatives of yours. Children get inspired when they read a story about other children who have achieved things. It could be a small thing, but I can do it as well. In Young India books in my website, I've very often seen that when children have written about something, they get inspired about how they can take it forward and do something more on that same line, whether it's saving a tree or getting the environment cleaned up. And my hope is that to collect these stories from around the world through my new project that I'm working on. It's called Zama Sama. I'm trying to invite stories from around the world, not just the SDG goals, but basically, as Anahita talked about, is the empathetic figure. How do we make children empathetic? How do we make them realize that everyone and every creature on this planet is important? Each one of us living in a different culture, different region, different language, different traditions, are all important. We all have a role to play, as well as the plant life, the animal life. Each one, if one thing is removed from the planet Earth, there's a repercussion. And we want children to realize the importance of that. And the best way, I think, is to sharing stories of children who have made a difference. Like one of the stories which, when I was researching for my website, I came across these two sisters in Bali, and Isabel and Malati, and they wanted to make a difference. And the way they went about it is they said, okay, when they looked at the rivers being clogged with plastic bags litter on the beaches, they said, let's do something about it. And they started distributing cloth bags like many of us have done before, and many such initiatives. They started giving talks in schools and marketplaces during festivals. They made an impact, but they felt it wasn't getting them where they want to be. So they took the next step forward. They said, let's have a signature campaign. And they hit upon the grand total of 1 million signatures. Now, but the population of Bali is about just 4 million. So to get 1 million signatures in a population of Bali, it means every single adult would have to reach out to. And then they hit upon this idea that, okay, we have so many visitors coming into Bali. Why don't we tap them? So one thing led to another. They followed they were determined, they're persevering. The school supported them, the school teachers supported them, their friends supported them. It became a big wave. And they started collecting signatures from visitors, from people, friends, family, villagers, everybody. And they collected 1 million. And went to the mayor with the 1 million signatures. But as you know, most bureaucrats and most adults are like, you poo-poo kids, okay, yes. You sort of turn them down. But they persisted. And what inspired them was when they came to India on a visit, a school trip, and they visited the Gandhi ashram in Sabarmati. And they read about Gandhi's fast unto death. So inspired by his action that they decided that we are going to go back to Bali and fast unto death. Of course, nobody allowed them to do that kind of a severe fast. They compromised. They had a fast, which was dawn to dusk, kind of a Islamic fast. And then they managed to get a media attention. Finally, the governor had to cave in, and he promised them that Bali would be plastic bag free, and they succeeded. 2019, Bali is declared plastic bag free. 2 school children, have made that difference. Now, I'm thinking that if a story like this can be read by other children, there are even simpler stories, like we did of our own Afroz Shah over here, who cleaned up the Versova beach. One man with an old elderly friend goes about cleaning the beach and becomes a movement, and so many people across the Bombay and other parts of the country are also following his example of cleaning up the rivers and the beaches. So it just needs that one little initiative. And if children can read stories of others who have achieved those targets, inspired by what, the targets that you're helping them, Anahita and Ritu, to reach and become better understanding, when they understand these issues, and they see that other children are taking those steps, I'm sure that they themselves could get inspired by these stories, because stories not just connect you intellectually, but also emotionally. And there's another lovely story that I've read about. It's a true story about a boy, Hazik Kazi, in Indus World School from Pune. And he has created a model of a ship called Urvis. And his thought came about when he saw a National Geographic film about a whale which had beached, and it had so much of plastic bags in it that it was starved to death because it felt it wasn't hungry. It moved him so much that he felt, what can I do to clean up the ocean? And one day he saw a kind of a whirlpool in the sink that when he was washing his hands, and he said, maybe that's the way to be doing this cleaning up of the ocean, create a whirlpool to suck up the plastic bags. Of course, his first prototype sank in first few minutes of his creating it, but the school supported him. He did a TEDx show. He was invited to New York there. And his project attracted so much attention that today scientists, engineers, architects are working on a model of a ship which can be replicated and made viable to go across oceans to clean up the seas. So these are small ideas by children. He was just an 11-year-old boy who came up with these ideas. We've read about the boy in Africa who created the windmill to generate electricity. We come across these stories. So I want these stories to come up of children from around the world. And if your students or anybody has a story of children who have stories to share, not just about environment related, but also about empathy, as Anita, you showed, kindness, sharing. There's so many things that we need to learn as human beings, better values that we need to have. And those stories will inspire others. So my project, which is called Zama Sama, is going to be an online podcast of stories from around the world. And they will be circulated to schools, hopefully of children's lives across the world, as well as children who achieve things with their hopes, their aspirations. One is to realize that we are one humanity. We are all different, but we are one humanity. Similar aspirations, challenges, hopes, fears, we're one. And we may live in different geographical settings, historical settings, economic settings. It's not important, but we are one human race. And we are all today facing a similar challenge in the world. And I'm hoping that this would come up through my story. So I would be very happy if your schools and all those who are coming on would be happy to contribute their stories. And we could share them with our schools, and you could take your learning the next step forward by sharing these stories with your students to inspire them.
Thank you, Shamin. We are all looking forward to the podcast. We are definitely going to look at the books that Anita has written and the TED Talks that Trupti talked about. And of course, we value Ritu's vision in understanding that it is children that we need to start with. When you talk about all the big things, I was sitting and wondering, what is it that we do with the children in our school? Because we do believe in the SDGs. We talk about it all the time. And I don't really have big stories to share, but I have some small ones. A junior KG child standing near the washroom and refusing to go to the classroom. And I went and asked him, why are you standing here? A 4-year-old, maybe a 4.5-year-old standing there. Ma'am, I'm standing here to see that everybody switches off the tap because they can't waste water. I think we've done a little bit of our job because we know that the child has understood the value of looking after the planet that we are living in. We have 17, 18-year-olds who have decided that instead of 20 odd pairs of jeans, they can make do with 3. And we have real stories of children who've done that in our schools. We don't really have big stories, but these small ones are huge in my mind, because I believe when they go week after week and help Afroz to clean up the beaches of Mumbai, they come back and the teachers tell me that these young teenagers who are usually very boisterous and naughty, and they don't think twice before they throw something out of the window, perhaps while coming back from the beach, they keep telling me every week the children are silent, reflective, and not a single wrapping paper goes out of the window. They go to the Adivasi villages in Borivali National Park and they do it relentlessly. And I think that is what we need to be. It is such an urgent matter that we have to be relentless. It's not about reduce, reuse, and recycle anymore. I think the time is only to reduce, reduce, and reduce. And I think that is the mantra of all environmentalists moving forward. I look forward to hearing from you again in the future. And thank you very much. Honored and humbled to be in the presence of minds like yours who are doing such great work. Thank you very much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ladies. That was an amazing session. I wish it could have gone on forever because each of you had such fascinating stories to tell, so much to give. I completely agree with you that the global community has to come together to achieve these goals. And that is also the point of the Global Tipping Point Summit. A single person cannot do it, cannot bring about a change. But if we collaborate, we will reach the tipping point and change must happen. All of you talked in such hopeful tones. When I often go to schools and I talk about the sustainable goals, the people sigh and they say, well, but can they ever be achieved? And I hate that attitude. But here you ladies have come up with such concrete examples. And I completely agree with you that we need to bring up children who, as His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, can fight from a center of peace. This is what I've learned from His Holiness. And I think it's very, very powerful. And none of you talked about foisting ecological grief on the children. You talked about how we can just make them think differently to create a better world. So I could also go on forever about this session. We want you to collaborate with us. And please, I think next time we think of anyone or know anyone who wants to build a school building, Trupti, we will contact you. Amazing work. Thank you very much. And Anita, I know you're going to do a great job of creating the framework with us. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Shamin. Lovely. We look forward to your podcast as well.
I'll just pick up from where ma'am stopped. And I'd like to say, for lovingly leading the way with hope and for demonstrating how we could be the change and how sustainable development can be a reality. Our grateful thanks to Ms. Chatterjee, Ms. Anita, Ms. Trupti, Ms. Shamin. And I would now like to move on to the next session. And this is something that is very close to all of us who love words, who love language, and who love stories. The book in any avatar, whether it is the e-version or the familiar print copy, remains the most enduring and potent instrument of change. And for our next session, which is aptly called Readers Will Be Leaders, it is my pleasure to invite Ms. Rakhi Chhabria, educationist, learner, and circle breaker, founder of Teachers Help Teachers, which is an online community of education. A warm welcome to you, Ms. Rakhi, and over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nina, for the wonderful introduction. And when I was just listening to the talks by the previous speakers, I was just amazed to see such wonderful discussion happening. And I only wish that we as educators are able to take this back into our classroom and inspire the students to at least probably achieve, even 10% of what is being spoken over here, and we would make this world a wonderful place. So yes, so moving ahead, as we know that readers are leaders. So this session that is going to be headed by Ms. Veena Basu. I would like to introduce our speaker, Ms. Veena Basu. She has more than 25 years of experience in education. She has worked as a consultant, guest lecturer, and a special educator. She's also worked as a special educator in various noted schools in Mumbai and USA. She has authored and published a phonic book reading program called Phonics 2C, Chaos to Clarity. And this is something that even I'm doing with my own child, so I would vouch for it. It's a beginner's reading program that she has developed. The Phonics program is a systematic and self-sufficient early phonics-based reading program, typically for children between the age group of 3 to 7 years. And of course, it can be carried forward as well. And this can be applied, of course, across all ages and demographics. It is designed to teach beginning reading and to build reading success through a comprehensive, structured, and spiral curriculum. Veena is also the founder of BWERV Multimedia Center, where parents, children, adults, and professionals can avail of various services such as cognitive skills training, counseling, remediation, OT, psychoeducational assessment, and other therapeutic alternatives. So we all know that not all readers are leaders, but all leaders are readers. And leaders have various exceptional habits, and one of them is reading. So let's hear from Ms. Veena about how is it that the habit of reading can be inculcated and can be emphasized more so in today's time. Over to you, Ms. Veena.
Thank you, Rakhi, for that introduction. And yes, the GTPS, I heard the earlier session, it was fabulous. So many lovely tips and details. And I'm so excited to be here talking about the next topic, which is readers will be leaders. May I just pull out my presentation? Give me just a second. Okay, here we are. So my background is I'm a teacher and I'm still teach on a regular basis. So like Rakhi said, all readers read, but not everybody becomes a leader. So what's the differentiator? Let's talk about that. Let's take a small quiz. All of your audience out there, what's the latest book that you've read? Just introspect and you can write in the chat box, just whatever your thoughts are. The next one, as a teacher, if you're teaching, suppose biology, what outside of your subject matter do you read, if you read? Third one is, we all have curiosity about something and that over which we lose our sleep. So what are these unanswered questions and how do you satisfy this curiosity? These are just a few questions. If you can take 30 seconds and introspect and write me the answers in the chat box, that would be great. Yes, I can see somebody's writing the books that they've read. My Life is Full by Indra Nui. Okay, so Shiva Trilogy, yes. So these are the books we've read, a few of them. How do we satisfy our curiosity? Are we all today politically, if we had to think of what's going on in our world, in Ukraine, if we just thought about that, we know Ukraine is a country, it's somewhere up northeast, it's cold, north, like somewhere, Europe, Asia, so on. But do we know more about Ukraine? And what is Ukraine? What are the problems it's facing? But we know there's something going on there. How do we satisfy our curiosity about Ukraine today, if we had to? Think about it. I know what I would do. And that's exactly what I did a few weeks ago when I started hearing about Ukraine and the problems. I Googled it. I read about it. I read. You can read it wherever, print media, internet, wherever, but you read about it, right? So reading is critical. What does reading do for us? It gives us all this. What's the benefit of reading? Just reading on any topic, a book, a newspaper, anything. It gives us all this information. It exercises your brain. It is one of the best exercises for our brain, especially as we grow older. Reading works, and reading a new language, a new script works better. It improves focus, memory, of course, entertainment, information, communication, reduces stress, live longer. All those are the benefits we know. If we all read for our own curiosity, to satisfy that curiosity, why do leaders read? Have you thought about it? What do you think? Why do leaders read? Read about Ukraine war, yes. Why do leaders read? Can we take 30 seconds and think about it and chat on the chat box? To be more aware, yes. To create impact, yes, Rashmi, they do create impact. To know the perspective of others, yes, absolutely. How would I know somebody else's perspective? One way is reading about, to get solutions to their problems, to get updated to the latest, to stay connect with the different fields, because we with our jobs just stay to one field, but it helps connect to various fields, to make better decisions, yes, to keep ourselves updated. Yes, these are the various reasons. If you Googled it, these are the reasons which I've just, all that you all wrote in the chat box are these reasons, the similar ones. If we had to just introspect or be mindful, let's go through them. Some of you all said for new ideas and to get new thoughts and to compare your thoughts with somebody else's and what they were thinking, to make better decisions in your business and in your life. It's not just work related, even your life decisions. To understand what options are out there for these leaders. That's the reason they read. To be exposed to various perspectives. Somebody wrote out there in the chat box. What it does, it promotes tolerance and other viewpoints. I think that's really one of the very important aspects of reading more and more. It builds in us a level of tolerance, and we start accepting other people's ideas. We've read, we've introspected, and we've connected them to our ideas and taken what we could from it. Reading also is a reminder to the important concepts. I may read a book once, but I mean, you take away only a percentage of that book or that article. But when we reread it and reread it, we get deeper and deeper into that book. And only then this multiple times reminds us of all the concepts that had initially impressed us. So it's extremely important. These are some of the reasons why leaders read, which are all those same reasons that you all typed in the chat box. So now if reading is important, there are umpteen languages out there. When I Googled, what are the spoken languages? And this is what Google told me. English, that many million, Mandarin, Hindi, and so on. So English is an important language spoken by a large number of human beings, right? So that spoken language, if that large number is there, the reading people also will be much bigger in that language. So I said, this is the international perspective, worldwide. Let's look what's happening in India. So this is the Indian perspective, that what percentage of children read in which language in India. And Google tells me, as per this is our India's Unified District Information Systems for Education. It's a report which gets published. So of course, 42% people learn in Hindi, and there's 26% which are learning in English. So 25% of our student population in our country are studying in English medium schools. So it's an important language for reading, right? So that's the data I put together. And then I said, okay, with this data, so if one language in this world, if I take an example as English, okay, we need to read in that language. How is this language? Is it an easy language? Is it a difficult language? Can I just have some chat from you guys? What do you think? English as a language, is it just an easy or is it difficult? Just your gut feeling. I'll give you all, if you all can chat with me and tell me, is it easy or is it difficult? English to learn, to read in English. It's challenging. So Jeanal says, yes, it's challenging. Somebody said easy. Easy for, we have heard it from childhood. Miss Nair says it's easy. Okay, if your medium of language is English, it's easy. People have perceptions that create phobia. It's always new learning, difficult for ones with a complete vernacular background. Yes, totally agreed. It's people who have studied in English medium schools, it's easy for them. If exposed to the language from childhood, it's easy to pick up. Difficult for natives, and so on. Because all the Indian languages are phonetic, but it's difficult. Okay, great. So I have loads of viewpoints there. So let me walk through that. If you somebody read this for me. This is just an example. If I had to read it, okay, let me read it. The bandage was wound around the wound. If you look at the wound, OU, the same word wound and the same spelling, same identical. Here I have to read it as wound. I do not read it as wound. So when I look at that word, I'm looking at the same spelling, but I'm supposed to read it in two different ways in one sentence. So though I'm exposed to this language from childhood, but when I'm reading this text, I have to know some more details about this script. Let's take another example. It's a similar example. Why must you polish the Polish furniture? So polish and Polish Again, 2 words, but I'm supposed to read them differently to really understand this sentence. So yes, this language is difficult, especially the reading aspect and the writing aspect. The spelling aspect is very difficult. Even if you're exposed from the beginning to English language. I'll give you another example why it's difficult. If I look at it for my spellings for writing, okay, if I look at if I hear E, centipede, E, but here I'm saying centipede, E, but I'm supposed to write E-E. If I hear feet, I'm supposed to write EE. If I hear leaf, I'm supposed to write EA. I hear equal, I'm supposed to write E. So there are 8 different ways I'm supposed to write one sound that I'm hearing, which is E. So that makes it difficult. Another aspect, I look at the letter A. When I'm reading, I look at the letter A. But when I'm saying the word aloud, I'm supposed to say apple. I'm supposed to say here apron. I'm supposed to say wall. I'm supposed to say banana. So it makes it complex. I'm looking at the same letter A, but I'm supposed to say it differently each time. And these are not big words. These are words that in kindergarten they're taught, or in 1st grade, a child is supposed to read these words in 4 different ways. My participants here, try and read this word, no? All of you all, in your own mind or aloud. And then I want you to think and introspect, how did you read this word? What helped you with reading this word? This is a relatively a biggish word, which you don't come across on a daily basis, but you all know how to read. So you did something in your brain which helped you read this word. So can you all chat and tell me what is it that you all did? Syllabification. Somebody said you broke them down to break it. Yes, it's the same thing, syllable by syllable. You did that. Phonics, break up the word. Yes, break it. So all of you all actually, each and everybody who has typed out there has told me, looked at the spelling. So Rashmi says, I looked at the spelling. And then what did you do, Rashmi? After you looked at the spelling, you tried to pronounce it. But how did you try to pronounce it? What helped you pronounce it? I had heard it while, so you matched it to your hearing, what you've already heard before this word. And then somebody said phonetically. Yes. So almost everybody said they broke it down and then did it phonetically, so as to read this relatively a new word, which you may or may not have come across. Correct? This is a word which came, at least I came across it in this movie, Dil Bechara, a couple of years when it got released. So, so what does research tell us? So y'all broke the word down. You used phonics. That's what most of y'all told me, syllabification. When you use syllabification, you're basically breaking it down, which is what phonics is all about. So in 2 countries, UK and US, which are primarily English-speaking countries, there were these reading panels set up because they were pumping in so much money into their federal schools, because public schools are funded by the government there. the UK and the US, and still their children were not becoming readers. Large population of kids were not reading. So both these reports came up and said that synthetic phonics is the way to go forward. So like you all said, phonics, yes, these two reports said the same thing. So then phonics helps you with what? It helps you learn to read. And as we learn to read, what happens is whatever we've heard about, we use a prior information and we make the connections, and then we start reading to learn. As adults, even if a young child, a second, third standard child, or a first standard child also, who knows a little bit of reading and keeps hearing her parents talking about the war and so on, if she wants to Google, she will be able to figure out something, what's going on. So she is reading to learn. And that starts in elementary and secondary schools. So what is this phonics, which is a system to learn to read and spell? It is taught in this format: tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. So tier 1 is to everybody, any language. It doesn't have to be English. It can be any language all over the world. It is taught in classrooms or in large numbers to all students. That's your tier 1. But some children find it a little hard, depending on the language and depending on their own ability. Both the factors play a role. So if English is an example, English as it is a difficult language to learn for beginning learners. Correct? So then school systems put together small groups, and those children have to be taught in smaller groups. That's called tier 2. Children who are at a risk factor of not learning to read and spell and write and become literate, they are taught in small groups of those, not 4, 6 children. They stay back after school and teachers teach them and so on. And this tier 3 is that intensely some children have to be taught because they have some kind of, I would guess, some difficulty, underlying difficulty, which could be anything, learning problems basically, specific learning disabilities like your dyslexia, those kind of difficulties. So we as when she introduced me, Rakhi introduced, so our primary work is in special needs, in tapping children's weaknesses and strengths, and then helping them use the principles of neuroplasticity. What is this principle of neuroplasticity? Is anybody familiar with this terminology? Happy to somebody to type and tell me if they are familiar with this terminology, which I've just put out there. Principles of neuroplasticity. What is neuro? So neuro is neurons. Okay, Rashmi says not really. Okay, neuro is neurons. And plasticity is like plastic. We all know plastic can be molded and you get jugs and mugs and anything made of plastic, chairs or anything. Correct? So plasticity is basically moldable. And neurons, our brain has billions of neurons, those little cells. And these neurons are like, if you do certain tasks in a certain way and you are determined, there is science now which is confirmed that these neurons can make the connections, and it's like a plasticity, it has the plasticity element. So that is what is neuroplasticity. So ability of the brain to form new connections and wire new learning. That is what is neuroplasticity. So just to give you an example, we have in our country the National Brain Research Center, which did an assessment of dyslexia assessment, did PET scans of children and came up with an assessment tool called DALI. It is all available. And then they taught the children for 3 months and then did their brain scans again. And they saw the brain connections happen when they were taught correctly, reading in a systematic, organized, systematic manner. Correct? And they could actually see it in their PET scans. So neuroplasticity exists, and for reading especially. So, and the so we as a center work using this principles of neuroplasticity. We have taken the fundamentals of reading in English language, and we've created this reading program, which would help you jumpstart reading for everybody in regular ed classrooms in the shortest, quickest, best possible manner. And with children who are in this tier 3, who have special needs, will need to be taught in a one-to-one setting, in a small setting, but using the same program. So going back to the progression, our readers. So now I'm hoping I have managed to get across that reading is extremely important for everybody in any language. That's not important which language. Any language, if you want reading, it helps you browse, search, return back to those topics, understand, introspect, and learn more. What do readers have to do after they know how to read to become leaders? They have to be contributors. They have to comment, tag, post, upload, exchange ideas, interact with people. They have to collaborate, work together, solve problems. That's the key word, collaboration. When we said this GTPS, the summit, not one individual is going to be able to change the world, make it a better place, leave it a better than what we inherited it as. We all have to collaborate. And the last is become a leader. Having a vision, promoting and participating and mentoring and making that vision happen. So Kumi has taken the lead for us for this GTPS summit to help us all come together and make that happen. So at this, I just want to say thank you. And if anybody has any questions or any thoughts, or I'm happy to, I'm just going to stop sharing. Yes. Right.
Yep. Thank you so much, Ms. Veena, for this wonderful talk on readers will be leaders, and also the importance of phonics, because we've seen as educators that children who have learning problems are often the ones who need to go back to basics and pick up and get their phonics clarity. Clarity in phonics is something which is very essential to facilitate learning. And we do see problems happening at later stages where children with learning difficulties are often told to go back and revise their phonetic sounds, and then the decoding skills, the syllabification. So yes, phonics does play an important role. However, I was just wondering, what about children who are visually impaired? So how do they go about becoming leaders?
Okay, so for them, that's a small group. They use Braille and of course technology. So they open their minds to by hearing, and so technology helps them big time. Absolutely.
Yes, audiobooks,
Right.
absolutely. So I think
Yes.
So reading isn't really restricted literally to reading books and books. It's also about how well you want to know the world. And today with technology, with videos, with audiobooks, I think it's become much more easier to seek the information and clarity that you wish to seek,
Right, but
and also connect. Yeah.
You can hear the information, but our brain has its limitations. So we need to then code that information in some written format, even if it is taking notes on a laptop, but we still need to write it down. So we need to learn the script. And for learning whichever script, we will need to read that script and write that script. So then it goes back to the importance of reading. It gets looped in. And like you said about special needs, the sad part is that internationally, they assess children only after 7 years for dyslexia, dysgraphia, which is almost 10 to 15% of the population, right? So if you assess them at 7, but all these phonics skills, the reading, writing, all the sounds awareness and letter sound association skills, those skills are learned in pre-primary, in that age group of 3 to 7. So that's where it needs to be introduced in classrooms, in regular ed classrooms, and not wait for the child to fail and then it gets introduced, right?
Thank you. In case there are any questions that anyone would like to ask before we end our session.
Yes, audiobooks. June says audiobooks. Yes, they are fabulous. They are books. You can hear them, and it's sort of you can do it for entertainment. You can do it for information, for anything. So technology, you have to merge it with your life. It's not just reading and writing, but how do you infuse technology into your learning at every step? That's the key. That's for us to become leaders. You can't just rely on just reading, writing. Then how do you strategize and learn?
And if I may, I think reading has to be made fun.
Absolutely.
It has to be made fun. It can't be a boring exercise. And as a school teacher, I began my career as a school teacher. So as a school teacher, I used to think up various ways in which, simple ways in which young children could be motivated to read. So instead of going to the library during the library session, we would be sitting in class and discussing the books that we read. And very often the non-readers felt enthusiastic about the books and started reading. And of course, at the end of the month, we would play a game, something like what's the good word game, or who's the character game, or dressing up as characters. And that would really propel them to go to the library, search, look, and read. So I think one of the things we have to remember is that reading should be fun. Because
absolutely,
nobody wants to be forced to read. As I said at one of the sessions earlier, being a literature teacher, suppose I say that you just have to read all of the 37 plays of Shakespeare if you want to be in my class. You're going to hate Shakespeare forever and a day. So I think it's important that we consider the interests of the child. And very often I've had parents come and ask me, oh, but my child reads comics. Oh, but my child reads graphic books. Oh, let them read whatever. And even if they read the scary Goosebumps, they're going to get over that stage and probably move to something else if you don't breathe down their back and say, don't read this, don't read this, don't read this. So I think as adults, we should just be thankful that they are reading, because they're going to pick up the basic structures of language. The correct pronunciation will come through audiobooks and through the way the teacher pronounces, of course. But reading must be a lifelong habit and can be made a lifelong habit only if it is fun. This is my take on it.
Yes, yes, absolutely. I think there's somebody who has written us along. What more can be done? If I may read somebody's chat.
Yes.
What more can be done for children who stay in buildings with no friends speaking English, even with relatives who are speakers of native language? And the same thing spills over in schools. Reading prescribed textbooks have a limited impact with one period. Absolutely. So what is language? Language has 4 aspects: listening, speaking, reading, writing. So listening and speaking are 2 critical aspects, as important as reading and writing. So this listening, so what can you do as a parent? Every single night, from the time the child is born, you read to the child. You read to the child. So they hear your voice calming and so on. It's just 15 minutes before sleeping, before light out. It is that bonding time between the parents, the father and the child, the mother and the child. But 10 to 15 minutes of reading to them. You can, as a baby, then as they grow a little older, they will decide what you want them to read to you. But in the beginning, for some time, you will decide, and that listening builds that listening skill. And then the speaking skill will come only by speaking. So once you're exposed to that receptive language, so language has 2 aspects, receptive and expressive. So we all human beings, in whichever language, if I'm exposed to English, I know thousands and thousands of English words, which are my receptive language. But I speak only one small percentage of those lakhs and lakhs of words. So expressive language is smaller, much smaller. Correct? So by listening to reading, my receptive language is increasing exponentially. Right? So read to your children. And then as you're reading, I would do this. Like I would be sitting where they are also seeing the text. So their eyes are scanning the reading that you're doing. So as they are scanning, then their interest, and then they pick up words and the vocabulary, and then they make those connections in the school. And somewhere along the line, that connection happens.
I think you're absolutely right. And I've been watching the comments in the chat. And even though we may initially want to resist, but children learn language through video games, through good movies and all. Thank you very much, all the teachers. These have been very inspiring comments made by you. And perhaps I just have to thank Veena for this presentation and say yes. Yes, of course, you've done a great job in creating a new program for young learners. Thank you very much, Veena. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Veena. Over to you, Nina. Nina,
ma'am, unmute yourself.
Unmute.
Yes, yes. Thank you so very much, Ms. Chabria. Thank you, Ms. Veena. We now move on to our next session. And this is perhaps at the heart of the entire GTPS summit, what we are going to hear about now. And that is preparing teachers and parents for personalized education for global citizenship, that's PEGC, And it is my pleasure to welcome Ms. Karen Sheva. She is the Managing Trustee of RISE, R-I-S-E, Infinity Foundation, the Chief Import Officer of MD Idabro Impact Solutions. Welcome, Ms. Sheva, and over to you.
Thank you so very much, Nina. I undoubtedly have the best job at the summit. I'm going to make that claim and not just say that I am pleased and privileged, because it is really my absolute honor to be introducing the lady herself, the driver, the force, or simply the founder and the summit director, none other than Dr. Kumi Vivana. I think the first thing you know when you talk to Kumi is that she just loves children. I think in every word she speaks, in every action she does, and every expression when she's with children tells you this. I think the second thing that really comes through when you get to know Dr. Kumi is what she says is the line that she believes in by Maya Angelou. I tried to be a rainbow in someone's cloud. How beautiful is that? And I think we've been seeing this rainbow since last week. No, not at all. Since the time that Dr. Kumi has been giving her knowledge and experience as the professor, former head of Department of English, University of Mumbai, she has 2 PhDs. And you can tell that she immensely enjoys teaching, learning, and writing. She's, of course, I think all of us undoubtedly know she's an education futurist, where she has really boldly implemented many out-of-box innovations in teaching and has engaged not just the minds, but even the hearts of many learners. And we just heard her just now talking about reading. She's, of course, an award-winning writer. Her book on sourceful intelligence, understanding uniqueness and oneness through education, was selected as among the 18 best books published in the US. And and very recently wrote the book, What Children Really Want. Don't you think that's such a critical thing for everybody, from educators, psychologists, parents, writers from all over the world, and none less than the Dalai Lama himself, who gave this critical acclaim. She was also selected by the world leaders in education as one of the 35 women from across the world changing education paradigms. And I think the way she does this as an international speaker, as a storyteller, and of course, the founder director of the Global Tipping Point Summit, I think is just simply amazing. And I don't think I want to take up more time, because I'm sure all of us are waiting to hear from her about her vast knowledge and experience that she has brought to the summit and to the like-minded educators that she has brought together to work collaboratively on some phenomenal projects because of this educational framework with which she believes, and we know that if she believes she's going to help make it happen, reduce the percentage of school dropouts. And at this point, which is supposed to be about 1.6 billion children worldwide, according to the 2020 UNESCO report. And she truly believes that this will help make millennials learn in ways that will tap into their unique configuration of intelligence while helping them become global citizens of our rapidly shrinking and increasingly threatened world. A situation that truly needs a futurist such as Dr. Kumi Vivana. Over to you, Dr.
Thank you, Karen. That was, you didn't turn breathless, and I'm astonished you didn't turn breathless. It could have been much shorter, but thank you all the same. And without much ado, I will get down to talking about the vision of GTPS, the idea of creating a new framework, which is called the Personalized Education for Global Citizenship, in short, the PEGC framework. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about this framework. I wish I could take in questions as we go along, but it's difficult on the digital platform. So please hold on to your questions. I will try and answer as many of them later. And the next session, again, is an open mic session at which we can continue talking about it. So, preparing teachers and parents. The structure of my presentation is fairly simple. What is the aim of GTPS, the Global Tipping Point Summit? The aim is to create a new narrative of conscious evolution. Now, these words may sound a little vague, but I'll unpack them during my presentation, and that's a promise. So the new narrative of conscious evolution, that is consciousness changing. The second part of my structure of my presentation today is how is this narrative of conscious evolution relevant to those of us who are in education? The third will be how can we encode this evolutionary narrative in the PTGC framework and nurture 21st century skills? And then I'll sum up with a few key takeaways. The subtitle of GTPS is moving from words to action. However, we do need to root it in words, to root it in concepts. And I will share with humility my ideas so that you will appreciate why we are creating this new framework. The vision of GTPS is to create through education an evolutionary narrative that is consciousness changing. So as I said, we'll move on and I'll try and unpack it. Now, the first question that will come to you, why are you talking of narratives rather than facts? We want facts. We don't want your stories. So why are you talking about a story of conscious evolution? Now, my answer to it is very simple. We human beings live by narratives and not by facts. We imagine that we root all our rational thinking, which of course, as psychologists will tell us, is just one tip of the iceberg, our rational thinking, our conscious thinking. We think we root that in facts, but we do not. We are creatures who love stories, who tell stories, who listen to stories, and we don't go by facts, really, most of the time. One of the great mythologists of the 20th century, Joseph Campbell, therefore, rightly observed that our myths are our reality. Now, let me explain this in a moment. If we could just get back to the earlier slide, please. Our myths are our reality. The stories that we hear become our reality. So all we need to do is to replace disempowering stories with empowering stories. Stories which do not respect equity, equality, if you like, but stories which replace that. So a small change in that direction can result in a new kind of consciousness, a new narrative. So our myths are our reality. Yes, of course, Rashmi, narratives are so important in creating thought. And we all know that our entire thought pattern is almost 95% created by the time we are 8 years old. After that, as psychologist Rob Williams says, we are fast asleep on the wheel of our car, and we keep responding or reacting in ways that we've learned from those narratives. So if you have been listening to the kind of narratives which disrespect the underprivileged, which think of riches and values and beauties as most of our fairy tales and all do, no harm in that. But we need to make children critical of them and make them realize that this is not the whole truth. It's far from the truth, in fact. In the 20th century, as a historian, Yuval Noah Harari says in his brilliant book, 21 Century Lessons for the 21st Century, he talks about 4 narratives which failed in the 20th century. the narrative of imperialism, the narrative of communism, the narrative of fascism, and the narrative of liberal democracy. I will not get into all of these. I wish I could, but time is very short. I'm moving on. In that book, Yuval Noah Harari says, at present, we do not have a new narrative. We were almost tempted to adopt redemption through technology as a new narrative. And we kept believing that technology will solve all our problems. But then the pandemic struck, and it made us seriously rethink all the stories that we've been living by. Next slide, please. So at present, there is a crisis of narrative. So I've dealt with that first word, narrative, and I hope it's clear that we all live by narratives and not by facts. Now, yes, one of the participants has written, they mold our mindset and control our thought process. Yes, absolutely. I now move on to the second term, which is consciousness. Now, this is a very, very vague term. What is consciousness? Can you touch it? Can you feel it? Can you taste it? Can you smell it? No. But the collective consciousness and the individual consciousness are very, very real. Therefore, Jiddu Krishnamurti, one of the most respected educationists of the previous century, rightly said, what we need through education is a revolution in consciousness. And then very interestingly, he spits the word revolution and juxtaposes it with peace. If we can change things dramatically through education, only then can we experience lasting peace. And how correct is he? Of course, way before him, Rabindranath Tagore very rightly said, the highest education is that which does not merely give us information, but makes our life in harmony with all existence. Now, this is very, very important. Today, we realize that we don't need to worry about information, about mugging things up. Information comes to us at the flick of a button. But if education can make our life in harmony with all existence, then according to Tagore, it is good education. And that's, of course, his experiment. That's what he tried to do with Shanti Niketan. And Tagore's entire vision is, of course, rooted in arts and teaching through the arts and teaching through nature and so on and so forth. Tagore wrote a brilliant short story called The Parrot's Training. And there he explains this idea very beautifully. Once upon a time, there was a parrot who was very happy sitting on a tree and singing. The palace was close by. And the king felt that there is no real need for this parrot to be happy all the time. What is he so happy about? And then he pondered a little and said, well, that is because this parrot doesn't know better. He's not educated. So the king hired learned pundits, and the pundits brought piles and piles of books. He was enclosed in a beautiful golden cage, and he was taught one thing after the other. A critic at the court looked at the bird and said, well, the bird doesn't seem to be happy. And the king said, well, I told you he doesn't know better. The long and short of the story is that the parrot dies. And when his body is poked, reams and reams of paper come out. Through this short story, written in 1914, Tagore tried to tell people that education does not mean cramming information. In fact, it kills the joy of education. We talk about children and we hope we're going to make them lifelong learners. How can we make them lifelong learners? By forcing facts and information down their throat without respecting their interests, their desires, their idea of what learning is. So I hope I've made this clear that we need to change all this in order to bring about lasting peace. And if you've seen the GTPS earlier sessions, everyone is talking with a sense of hope. If we approach children in this way, then the result will be this. If we teach them the SDGs and in a very simple and child-friendly manner, they will absorb that because they are going to take in those new narratives. And it's only these new narratives which will change things. Again, I come back to Yuval Noah Harari. Harari says, a change in consciousness is more ready now than ever before. For every dollar spent on developing technology, the next dollar should be spent on changing education and changing consciousness. Of course, Harari does it himself. He is a practitioner of Vipassana, and he very strongly believes that this is the only way to go. Couldn't agree more with them. I've taken the thinking of Ken Wilber, and I'm trying to explain this to you in a very simple way. So don't feel intimidated by the diagram. The whole idea here is that the shift in consciousness can happen if we take children from an egocentric intimacy, me and my alone, my marks, what I have achieved, my medals. Can we shift that from egocentric intimacy to ethnocentric intimacy, the larger group, to nation-centered intimacy, considering the country as a whole, geocentric intimacy, the world as a whole, but the ideal, the goal is cosmocentric intimacy, and it can be done. It can be done. We're talking about creating the new framework for early learners. It can be done in extremely simple ways through storytelling, art, body movement. And of course, we need to rethink our method of assessment so that we actually bring about this shift in consciousness. I hope I'm clear up to this point. We move on. Now, there is meaning in every crisis. The choice humankind has for the post-COVID era is between the stories or the narratives of conscious evolution or unconscious self-destruction. There is no third option. We either go in for conscious evolution or we go in for unconscious self-destruction. This is a beautiful quote. Forgive me, it's a little long, but it's not difficult. It can be understood very easily. What each of us does now could tip the tipping point of evolution. That's why the summit is called the Global Tipping Point Summit. We have the power to tip the scales. So every single person sitting here is important, numerically important. If you believe that you want to be the change, as Gandhiji said, then you have to, if you want to see the change, then you better be the change. The tip of the tipping point is always, this is very beautiful, towards more life, intelligence, love, and creativity. And this is what Barbara Marx Hubbard, the pioneer of futurism, said. Could move on. So if we hold a positive vision and operate from a commitment to nonviolence, unequivocal empathy, compassion, and wisdom, we could consciously ascend to the next stage of evolution and move from being Homo sapiens to Homo amor, but it has to be unequivocal. Now, very often we give children mixed messages. Let me give a quick example from Bollywood, if you will. We had a very clear distinction between the good guy and the bad guy. There would be the good guy who would not know how to wield a knife or a gun, as against the bad guy who would always be seen with those with knives and guns. But what happened is that the two became conflated in the 70s with movies like The Diwar, The Angry Young Man. So it became okay to do the wrong thing for the right reason, and violence came in. We need to have we need to be very clear about our position on nonviolence. And nonviolence, even in the face of violence, is something that I experimented with as a storyteller. And we had, after the bomb blast in India, in Bombay, we had little children whom we worked with all over Mumbai, and we got them to tell stories of how they need to remain nonviolent even amidst this violence. And we talked about it and different strategies, and the children came up with amazing ideas. So what I'm trying to say is that we do not need to give them mixed messages saying, well, it could be this, it could be that. Can't be that. Right? But so if we hold on to a positive vision, then what is the result of it? Next slide, please. Then we will really experience a technological utopia, because then technology will do the more mundane, routine tasks and free us to do other things that we want to in life. But next slide. If we continue operating from selfishness, rapacity, and a manic desire for self-gain, you see this all around, then the next slide, we could be experiencing a post-truth dystopia. So the ideal society is a utopia. The reverse of that is a dystopia. And that could result in the extinction of the human race. And here I may sound like a prophet of doom, but we must realize that after all, the planet has seen 5 mass extinctions, and this could be the 6th, and we could prevent it by just smartening up. So with this, I want you to realize that the narrative of conscious evolution needs to be embraced. Now, with this simple diagram, I will go a little deeper into this narrative. If we embrace this narrative, it will result in an evolution of consciousness, a deep sense of global oneness triggered by self-awareness and self-regulation, which is what mindfulness is all about. Now, you will say that this deep sense of global oneness has been triggered by the pandemic, but it is still not rooted in self-awareness and self-regulation. So when we create a new framework for our children, we need to bring these aspects in of self-awareness and self-regulation. It will also result in social evolution, self-actualization at both the individual and the collective level. So what is self-actualization? It's being the best version of yourself. The term comes from the positive psychologist Abraham Maslow, and many of you must have heard of Maslow. So self-actualization can happen at the individual level and at the global level. So when it happens at the individual level, you become the best version of yourself and you contribute to society in a major way. The narrative of conscious evolution will also result in technological evolution, which will be guided by ethics. This is very, very important. Today, a major field of study is digital ethics. We could be masters and not slaves of technology. Way back in the early 20th century, the writer D.H. Lawrence very correctly said, for God's sake, let us be men, not monkeys minding machines. And I don't need to elaborate on this. There is far too much evidence of that all around. So this narrative is going to create a win-win situation. Next slide, please. Now, this brings me to the second part of my discussion. How is the narrative of conscious evolution relevant to those involved in education? It's a very wonderful concept, but then how do we translate it and bring it into education? So that's the second part. So if we work on the 3 forms of evolution of consciousness. So what education can aim to do is to create a deep sense of global oneness, which is triggered by self-awareness and self-regulation. This is very, very important. Even at a very young age, children can be taught to introspect. There are numerous videos and print material and scholarly articles available on how we can really inculcate in our children something which is called emotional granularity. Granularity. So what is the idea here? That you should not only say, I'm sad, very generic. Sad is a very, very generic term. Be more specific. Is it grief over the death of your pet? Is it what? So when you work with that and you teach children the vocabulary of emotions, emotion, energy in motion, they will become automatically more self-aware. Those of you who want to explore it, there is tremendous amount of material available on emotional granularity, and it's something worth noting. Now, if the next step is that once you are aware, then you will contribute to society in a meaningful way. So what can education aim to do? It can assist self-realization at the individual level. So we teachers have been talking since 1983 about multiple intelligences, about the concept of inclusivity, about personalized learning, where we focus on the individual and the growth of the individual. So of course, education needs to do that, but it can also assist self-actualization at the collective level, at the national level, at the global level. So collaborative learning with an emphasis on social justice issues and human rights. We had the marvelous panel of young people yesterday who talked about these social justice issues, about gender equity, class, caste, race, color, age, differently abled people. So if we collaborate, then even social justice issues can be meaningfully handled. And the third is technological evolution. What education can aim to do is to humanize technology. This is extremely important, and ensure that it is rooted in digital ethics. I just talked about that. So that it works for the good of mankind and not for the selfish gains of the creators of those technological equipments. This would enable us to invest in relationships with humans rather than machines. And we cannot let technology trump humanity. Humanity must be at the center. So that brings me to the third part, GTPS. How can we encode this evolutionary narrative in the PEGC framework that many of us will start creating after 7 o'clock today? So our work actually begins after the summit ends to nurture 21st century skills. We will be rooting this network in the Sustainable Development Goals, in the 4 pillars of learning which UNESCO has given us. And the 4 pillars of learning are, as many of you would know, learning to know, study skills, learning to do, application skills, learning to live together, very, very important, and learning to be. You be yourself, understand your deeper dimensions, and contribute to the world. And we also root it in the NEP, the National Education Policy of India, which has some very interesting ideas. Now, the structure of this new framework is going to be a tripartite structure. Number one, we will be rethinking the basics of education. So we are rethinking assessment. Those of you who attended the entire summit will remember that we had a fantastic panel discussion on the 19th of how we need to change assessment from being formal to being progressive and informal. And that group is going to help us do it. We also need to see the content. But what we are doing in this particular framework is we are not creating content. We are taking the content from the different boards, and more or less the themes are similar. And then we will tell teachers how we feel these could be really taught. So content and pedagogy will go hand in hand. The second thing is we will be creating short-term training programs for teachers, librarians, for leaders. I think those of you who were there for Dr. Ranjini Krishnaswamy, her presentation on the first day would remember how important it is for readers to have skills. And we keep calling them 21st century skills, but apart from technology, the skills are common. They are skills which all educational leaders should have always possessed. And importantly, we are bringing parents into this dialogue. We are bringing parents in because parents are major stakeholders. So we don't want parents to be in one camp, not knowing what is really happening in school, or, having some kind of unpleasant feelings towards the teachers. We want to bring them together. We want parents and teachers to work together. And we also want to constitute an R&D team, a research and development, or perhaps we will call it research and innovation team, comprising researchers who are experienced educationists and are willing to work collaboratively to resolve issues. So this is the structure in 3 parts of the new framework that we will be concentrating on. The focus areas of the framework will be necessary changes in assessment. It is my belief, and also the belief of a lot of other people, including Shrija, who again spoke on the first day and who demonstrated how, unless assessment changes, even if we have the best content and the best pedagogy in the world, we will only be making cosmetic changes. For the system to actually change, we really need to rework assessment. It's very, very important. So normally you would talk about assessment as coming towards the end. You would say content, pedagogy, teacher training, assessment, or assessment, teacher training. But no, here we are focusing on a new assessment system, which is going to be child-friendly, learner-friendly, and show us the development of the child. The second thing is that we will be creating sample lesson plans to demonstrate how teaching can be done in active sensorial ways through nature. We had that fantastic panel with Bittu Saigal. Through nature, you don't teach nature studies as a separate subject, as environmental studies, because then it's deemed perhaps less important than maths and science and English and other subjects. No, you teach those concepts through nature. And I have several examples to give, but time is too short today. We also don't want the arts to be extraneous. Drama, this, dance, music, all extraneous. No, all that can be integrated. The concepts, the basic discipline concepts, as well as life skills, can all be taught through the arts, through nature, and as Nupur and her husband Richard demonstrated, through sports, through games. So then when you talk about no learner left behind, it can become a reality. Because if you go back for a minute to your multiple intelligences, we all have at least 3 intelligences, teachers, and we can really nurture many, many more. So when you approach a subject, a concept through nature, arts, sports, games, your students are bound to be interested. We also had a lovely session by Mr. Alexander Johnson on digital pedagogy and gamification. And I can tell you that I, for one, never thought that gamification could be used for teaching social, emotional, and ethical intelligence. So the only thing that limits us is our own limited thinking. And therefore, with absolute open-mindedness and the courage to explore new avenues, we should be trying to create lesson plans, including all these. Next, please. We will also be rooting it in technopoiesis. Now, this sounds like a fancy term. I'll unpack it in a minute, but just bear with me. We're creating genuinely inclusive classrooms. Yesterday, we had this wonderful panel who talked about inclusive classrooms and how, though it is there in theory, in practice, it is something very, very different. So we need to bridge that gap. And ways of helping children with social, emotional, and ethical learning. And I already explained emotional granularity, which is extremely important and can be taught from the earliest stages. Today's panel talked about ways of nurturing civic sense and service orientation in young learners. And finally, the importance of reading. So these are the focus areas of the framework. Next, I promised I would unpack the term technopoiesis. So technopoiesis is grounded in the consciousness changing concept of sourceful education, sourceful, which is this change from a self versus other mindset, me versus you. We have been taught to lock ourselves in competition, but we can move from that to a self and other consciousness, which is collaborative. But collaboration is so difficult because our entire training has been in the self versus other consciousness. So self versus other to self and other to an all is self. Now, the all is self sounds really vague, but it isn't. At the highest level, quantum physics tells us that everything is energetically interconnected. And this is the stage that we can move our children to. So next slide, please. Sourceful intelligence, therefore, can be simply defined as experiencing and understanding our uniqueness and our oneness. We are all special. We have had 55 experts at this summit. They are all great in their specific areas. We need to celebrate that. We need to celebrate the richness and the diversity of their knowledge. So we are unique in our own way, but we can collaborate and we can be one. The upper areas of our mind make us think of separateness. The deeper areas of our mind make us aware of our oneness. That is what sourceful intelligence is. Now, next slide. How can it be transacted in the class? Through the simple process called technopoiesis. Now, there isn't time for me to elaborate on it, but this 5-step process, if you keep it in mind when you are creating your lesson plans, the shift automatically happens from a self versus to a self and to an all is self. And this is my unique work, which has won me accolades. That's not by way of ego, that's just by way of statement. Next slide, please. And this kind of education, sourceful education, is completely in alignment with UNESCO's 4 pillars of learning. By the way, one of the great architects of this pillar was our Rajya Sabha member, Dr. Karan Singh, an absolute intellectual, learning to know, learning to do, learning to live together, learning to be. And sourceful education, next slide, is also completely in alignment with the SDGs. So everything that is mentioned, all 17 goals, are taken care of by this kind of education. Yes, please. Next. So there are a few phases. There are 5 phases to the PEGC framework. We will be creating a new educational framework with sample lesson plans using technopoiesis. Second, phase 2, we will be training teachers for pilot testing the new framework. Phase 3, pilot testing the new framework in 50 schools. Phase 4, modifying the framework based on the feedback received from teachers, parents, and learners while pilot testing. And lastly, finalizing the framework after presenting it for further scrutiny and refinement at Global Tipping Point Summit 2023. Okay, so this is the game plan. I will end with a story. I just mentioned earlier during the presentation that every single one of us is important. And I'll illustrate it through this 100th monkey story. This is a story which is rooted in fact. Anthropologists on different islands in Japan were observing monkey behavior. And in order to befriend the monkeys, they gave them sweet potatoes. One little monkey seemed to be the leader of the pack, and on one island, they called her Emo. One day, Emo took her sweet potato, washed it in water, and popped it in her mouth. And it tasted nicer without the mud and grime. So all her little friends started doing it, and the adults caught on. The adults catch on late. This is my stage aside. So you would say, well, no big deal. This is simple imitative behavior. But no. Monkeys on other islands in Japan started washing their sweet potatoes. Rupert Sheldrake explains this with the morphic field theory. And according to this theory, when a certain number of people belonging to a certain species repeat a thought or repeat a gesture, it becomes a part of the collective consciousness. In the 1960s, when people talked about nuclear disarmament, nobody thought it would ever be a reality. But because that many people lobbied against it, it has become a reality. The ecological movement, climate change movement, everywhere it's reached the tipping point. So I want to tell the audience here that every single one of you is important. Metaphorically, you may be the 7th or the 28th or the 97th monkey. But when the tipping point is reached, change must happen, and change will happen. And we can't do it individually. We have to do it collaboratively. So I'll end with the key takeaways of this session. What we dealt with today was why do we need a new narrative that is consciousness changing? Next, we talked about the 3 forms of evolution: the evolution of consciousness, social evolution, and technological evolution. Then next slide, please. We talked about how the narrative of conscious evolution is relevant to those involved in education. And how can we encode this evolutionary narrative in the PEGC framework to nurture 21st century skills? So I will end with a quote from one of my favorite writers, Elizabeth Barrett Browning. Earth's crammed with heaven, and every common bush afire with God. But he who sees takes off his shoes, the others sit around and pluck berries. So teachers, we've been berry pickers long enough. Let's get together and create the heaven on earth. Thank you so much. Thank you for your attention.
Oh my goodness. Kumi, that was just incredible. I mean, really. And as chairperson, I want to abuse my position and try to ask you all the questions myself. But of course, I'm not going to do that, because I know I would love to learn more and more about your thoughts and understand them, because not are they just interesting, but they are like absolutely, the futurist term for you is absolutely befitting. And I think we really want to understand more. But and as I said, I'm going to resist the temptation of asking you all my questions, but instead go to the, and also keeping in mind the time limit, go very quickly to what's there in the chat box. First and foremost, of course, we had very clearly the thought that narratives are so important in creating thought, and they mold our mindset and control our thought process. Thank you very much, Sabha and Rashmi, for saying that, because it's just so absolutely true. And another one that came from Sarosh Baria, which I think again is something that maybe you can speak on just a little bit very quickly, is that the Indian education system, teach, test, and hope for the best, okay, is what's happening everywhere in schools as well as in colleges, and an absolutely redundant formula. So as you said, we need to rework the assessment framework. So I think two quick questions. One is, what is the narrative for the 21st century based on what was asked over here? And second is, what kind of an assessment framework do we really need to look at and rework so that we are prepared for the 21st?
That is exactly what we are working on. The narrative is very clear to us. The narrative is definitely one of conscious evolution, and we are going to do that through education. And as I said earlier, we all need to pool in our talents. We are specialists in certain areas, so please, let's work collaboratively. If you have knowledge or skills in a certain area, you could become one of the advisors, you could hop in, you could do whatever. You can just help us do this. Because 55 people have spoken at this summit, and all are people with vision and with hope. So let's not keep saying, I hope this happens. We need to change our language. I will make it happen as best as I can. That is what my language is. I will make it happen as best as I can. I hope that answers it.
Absolutely. And I think the question on the assessment, because also what was the follow-up statement on that was that ultimately schools cater to what colleges want. It's the entire system, right? Education.
That's it. So if we change things at the basic level, so we are starting with our PGC is the framework from KG to standard 2, and then we move on. So if 55 people come together and they are there to show the way, then probably at some point the government and people are going to take interest in it and actually implement it. And even if they don't, we go our way. We offer it to private bodies. We offer it to the UNESCO. We offer it to the United Nations, because they have given this vision, but we are giving them the infrastructure. We're giving them the pattern. We're telling them how to go about it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I think one of the other questions that we did get for you was, could you suggest reading or reference material for emotional granularity?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's not a problem. There is a huge amount. Even if you Google it, there's a huge amount. But in the field of education now, lots, and there are also some classic videos on emotional granularity. So there is a lot of material available out there.
Awesome. And I hope the person who's asked this question will go do that and find that information to help you take your interest forward. Great. I think I am going to ask one question. I think I can allow myself that.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. So I am so fascinated with the entire consciousness, the social, the ecocentric aspects of what you mentioned. And I think, somewhere that all comes down to, when you talk of the narratives, about the value system, because, at the base, beyond anything else that can trigger and push us forward, is the value system. So what are those kind of values that you think of? And, we are also working on the value system.
Well, I mean, if we go back to the 21st century skills, and again, I've been saying it's always been important: collaboration, empathy, change orientation.
Wow.
Then we need our character strengths. And I think grit, resilience would be very much a part of anything that I create, because we don't want to create softies. The technology is changing the world exponentially. And if you're trained for a certain job today, you may be rendered irrelevant tomorrow. So unless you have the grit and the resilience to cope with it, you'll crack up, you'll suffer from mental health issues, you'll be one more burden to society.
Great.
So I think a lot of those positive values and virtues, Seligman and Peterson, they talk about it, the 24 strengths, character strengths and virtues, also extremely important. And those can be woven into the fabric of it. And as a storyteller, I would love to do that through stories. What better way?
No doubt about that. I think stories does not matter what age you are at. From 2 also is too big, right? From 1 year old to a 90-year-old, all will hear your story. So absolutely.
And those of you who are interested will attend Global Tipping Point Summit 2023. By then, we'll be ready with our new framework and we will present it to you for your comments.
Great. I'm sure most of us have already blocked our calendars for 23. I can assure you of that. To me, I don't think there's any doubt about that. And we have one last question in the chat box that I do want to cut at before I hand it back over to Nina. And that was from Dr. Jamila saying, could you share more ideas on starting with assessment and moving to learning? Right. And of course, she congratulated you on the great initiative that you do. So any thoughts from you on this?
Oh, well, definitely, because as I said, we deem assessment as almost it's a foundation stone in this whole framework that we are trying to create. Well, if you just learn for a test or an exam, that is rote learning. That is not learning which you do out of choice. This is not going to make any difference. Learning has to be embodied, and I'm breaking up the word embodied. So it has to be something physical. It has to cater to your interests. So the kind of assessment pattern that we are trying to create will map that. Now, my son, people thought me crazy when I took him to Besson Montessori, 23 miles away from home, one way.
Wow.
And the report cards would read, Jehan can roll a mat. And people would say, what kind of an assessment is this? But it's talking about the different skills that the child acquires. So the whole tenor of it is I can do things, not I can't do things. Oh, I've only got 50. I should have got 80, 90, whatever, 99. So we want this entire mapping to be done in a different way. When we want the teachers to maintain observation diaries. That when you look at a child and the child is involved in free play, there are so many things you notice about the child's interests, etc., abilities, strengths, weaknesses. So the teachers maintain that kind of diary. Then there is a child portfolio. Then based on that, you decide on how they can be helped. And that's why we want parents also to come in, because they are major stakeholders and they observe the children at home and they would be able to help you really create something important. So this entire pattern, we are trying to rework with the assessment committee. And at present, I have nothing concrete to show you, but I can say that all of us have this vision, and in alternative forms of education, like the Waldorf system, the Reggio Emilia, the Montessori system, these are things which have been tried out. So we're trying to put all this together to create a new pattern of assessment, which is going to be basically stress-free for a child.
And I think stress-free sounds so amazing, knowing the situation that our youngsters find themselves all the time. So I think gratitude, I think as a parent, as an educator, and as part of the ecosystem of learners, I think I would like to really definitely thank you on behalf of everybody else as well in this conference. Wish you all the very best for all the phases, because we are waiting to see the framework in 23. Thank you so very much, Dr. Kumi. And with that, I'll hand it over to Nina.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Miss Karen. Thank you, Kumi ma'am. If I may say so, that was both soulful and exhilarating. A wonderful session, ma'am. As always, a pleasure to hear you. It reminds me of being a student once again. We now move on to the open mic session. And for that, I request Dr. Kumi Vivaina and Ms. Donna Reen to take over. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Nina. I think Donna has been fielding some audience questions. If the speakers are here and would like to answer those questions, we'd really welcome you to do so. Donna, you'll have to unmute yourself.
Okay, we've been having questions through the panel discussions, and because of constraint of time, we could not answer those questions. So here's the first one. This is to Dr. Krishna Swami. While teachers advocate critical thinking, should we also teach students lateral thinking? If Dr. Krishna Swami is not there, Kumi, will you answer?
Well, there are basically Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
There are basically three kinds of thinking as psychologists know them. Lateral thinking was obviously popularized by Edward de Bono, but it's extremely important to realize that all forms of thinking are valuable and essential. Vertical thinking, psychologists have a different kind of framework for that. They call vertical thinking what we call logical thinking. A leads to B leads to C, rational linear thinking. The second kind of thinking they talk about is associative thinking, which is the kind of thinking which could change very radically. Today, you may think of a certain issue in some way, but when you read a book and you hear someone talk, you could change your views. So that is associative. When they've done computer studies, while you're doing linear thinking, your mind is forming geometric patterns. The computer probes show that. But when you are doing associative thinking, they go out like roots of a tree and they latch on to one or the other. The third kind of thinking is unitive thinking, which combines these two. So if very briefly, if I were to say this, what we mean by lateral thinking is a combination of associative thinking and unitary thinking. And unitary thinking is the highest form of intelligence. So all need to be triggered. And if the teachers are conscious of it, they will very skillfully weave that into their lesson plans.
Okay. So the second question is to the nature and arts group. If a teacher does not have knowledge of nature or the arts, how does she or he teach through them?
Is there anyone here from the nature or the arts group? If you're there, please unmute yourself and answer.
Donna, you're muted, dear.
Someone muted me, I don't. So, okay, so Kumi, I think since we've taken the answers from them, I think you could answer this question.
Yes. If a person, a single person, is not going to be good at everything, right? And you can't have knowledge of nature and of arts and of games and of sports and of gamification. That is why when we talk about creating lesson plans, we talk about collaborative efforts. I was dealing with a group of 160 teachers in Kuwait. And initially, the teachers were so resistant to the idea of creating collaborative lesson plans. But when you sit together in a group and you do it, and each one gives you one idea or the other, then you are creating something which is very, very meaningful and contributes not only to the students' growth, but to your growth as a teacher. So I may not be good at one thing. I may not be good at dance or at drama, but I recruit the drama teacher to tell me. I recruit the art teacher to tell me. I've done that myself. I have taught someone glaciers through dance, and that person is bodily kinesthetic and learned it. So I think that answers it.
So there should be collaboration even at the teacher level.
Absolutely.
Besides
Absolutely.
the learners.
And you can call in parents there.
Yes, okay. Now this one is to the learner profile group. Unless we assess in the traditional way, how can we be sure the content has been learned?
All right. Let's talk about assessment in the traditional way. As the head of the Department of English in the university, we very enthusiastically taught our young people. 4 years later, when they came for MPhil interviews, most of the concepts were wiped clean out of their minds. And we thought we had done a great job. We taught them this, we taught them feminism, we taught them Showalter there, we taught them Elen Sixus. And then when you say, what was the view of Elen Sixus, they give you a blank look. They did get their marks, but was that learning? That was not learning. When you study for an exam, it's very, very short term. And definitely if you study without much interest, it's even worse. So learning is not marks. Learning cannot be revealed through the marks that a student gets. But learning happens in very, very diverse ways. So firstly, we need to change our concept of what learning is. And that is what we are going to do when we create this new assessment pattern.
So the next question to active sensorial and specifically to Nitin Orion, who is not here. What is the definition of spirituality you would be guided by when teaching?
Well, I can't talk on behalf of Nitin. In the case of others, we've discussed it and I've come to these answers, but I don't know what spirituality means to Nitin. But spirituality is all encompassing. Religion is very specific to rituals, symbols, and other things. But when we talk about spirituality, we are literally talking about an energy, as mother of Aurobindo said, a supramental energy, a divine spark that every single person has in him or her. So approaching that, bringing out the best. We talk about daring to be human, being human, such a commonly used phrase now. But what is it to be really human? As Swami Vivekananda said, that being human is being human, divine, and animalistic, all three. And the choice is ours.
So this one is specifically to Dr. Shazot, who mentioned atom dance. And I think Nina has the answer for this. Could you elaborate on atom dance?
Thank you, Donna. I want to say that I'm answering this on behalf of Dr. Anju, and I'm not really a science person, so I hope I'm able to do justice to what she has very nicely explained. Now, what she says is the atom dance was something they practiced with 9th graders, and it was about the periodic table. It was about identifying and understanding the structure of the atom through fun and games. So children were asked to choreograph a dance related to atomic structure and the nature of elements. The number of dancers had to correspond with the number of electrons, and the other participants or the other students had to guess or identify which particular element it was. Dr. Anjuk makes it a very clear point to say that, this is never to be done as a standalone activity. It is a part of a larger module, and this itself was done after a series of other follow-up activities. She very kindly has provided this particular website, email, sorry. It says info@ngis.in, and she's offered to take a session on this if there are very many number of teachers who are interested. I hope, Donna, I've done justice to the answer. Thank you. I'm talking about atoms after ages.
Yes. Okay. So the next one, again, Nina, you have the answer. It's for Ashok Rathod. Why is your foundation named as Oscar Foundation? Is there a story behind it?
All right. As Donna has very clearly mentioned, I answer on behalf of Mr. Ashok Rathod. Now, the story behind the name Oscar, the name itself comes from the Oscar Awards, the film award ceremony that Hollywood hosts. But today, Oscar stands for Organization for Social Change, Awareness, and Responsibility. Thank you, Donna.
Yeah, I think that's it for the questions. There is one question, but it's too general. How do you manage adolescents in the classroom? Kumi, can you answer that?
Well, I have dealt with students at the college level, but I've also done a lot of teaching in schools. And I think if you ignite their passion, your work is done. You don't really have a problem with them in the classroom. I can only give one quick example. That at one point I got a phone call. I received a phone call from a principal who said that her kids absolutely hated Shakespeare, and they were going to appear for an exam in 2 months, and they were not willing to learn Shakespeare. And I was asked to do something, and I was given 40 minutes to do whatever that something meant. So I created a PowerPoint called, "Boy, that cool dude Shakespeare still rocks." And the kids were intrigued. They thought, is she kidding? I just told them how relevant Shakespeare was. I quoted from him. We had fun. Oh, did he talk about jealousy? Yes, he did. Did he talk about ambition? Yes, he did. Did he talk about love? Yes, he did. Was he bawdy? Oh, he could be as bawdy as hell. We just had so much fun. And I was quoting from Shakespeare. At the end of 1 week, the principal phones me and tells me, "You've created a problem for me. Now the class wants to learn 2 Shakespeare plays before the exam instead of 1. What did I do? Nothing. I just made them feel that Shakespeare was relevant and made them feel that there's something worthwhile in reading this man's work. That's all. So I think if we engage them, if we get them to participate in the work, active sensorial learning is something we are talking about. If we approach through the arts, so at the university level, when I do a Shakespeare play, we would be looking at the different ways in which it had been produced, some of the classic productions, some of the more modern productions, and by then the students would know the plays. So I think if you engage the students, there is no discipline problem, in short. And if you believe in multiple intelligences and you approach them in different ways, you're sure you're going to touch them in some way or the other.
Okay, fine. I think that ends. If you have any questions, you can always write to us, because as I see, some of the questions are very general, so we might have to dialogue with you. So you could send your questions to gtpsforchange@gmail.com. I've put it in the chat box, and we'll ask the experts to answer them, even after the summit. Okay, and so now we cannot end without thanking. And Yazdi, will you put the thank you slides on, please? Can we go ahead?
Yes, can we have full screen? Thank you.
Okay, we'd like to thank Dr. Kumi S. Vivaina, who is the founder and summit director. If it was not for her indefatigable energy, her never say die attitude, I suppose it's all charged by the fire in the belly. So we would not have had this summit, and I think it has been a successful summit from the comments that we have had, the feedback that we have had, and it doesn't end here. She still works with us and with you all on the summit ahead. The action starts now after 7 today. Okay, so thank you, Dr. Kumi, for this wonderful summit.
Thank you very much, Donna. It may sound like a mutual admiration society, but I can't help it. Donna has been my summit coordinator at the GTPS, but I've known her for donkey's years. And every new idea I've bounced off with her, and day or night, she's always available. So I'm deeply grateful to Donna Reen for supporting me and being the summit coordinator. Thank you, Donna. We also need to thank, next slide, please, our wonderful supporters. Just one day before our Global Tipping Point Summit started, we had a wonderful letter from His Holiness the Dalai Lama, fully supporting the GTPS concept and initiative. And so did Lieutenant General Shokin Chauhan, very renowned psychiatrist, Dr. Kersi Chowda, educationist Sri M, Sadhguru, who is known to all, our friend Cyrus Brocha, who is always there to support all my initiatives, Bamani Rani, Rageshwari Lumba Swarup, the singer-actress, the fitness guru Mickey Mehta, Shyamak Dawa, the brilliant choreographer, and Ramachandra Dalvi and his wife Sita Dalvi. The Dalvi Foundation has supported us very, very majorly even this time. They have helped us with several things, including the app that you've been reading about, the Teachers Talk app. So a big thank you to all our supporters. Next slide. We've been also very fortunate to have a very, very supportive advisory board, beginning with Dr. Firoza Godrej. The first person I spoke to about the global tipping point concept was Dr. Firoza Godrej. And she waved a green flag and she said, I'm with you on this project, just go ahead. Mr. Sanjay Rastogi of Tata Trent, Mr. Noshir Dadrala, Ms. Anaita Subedar, Dr. Shehnaz Kama, Mr. Yazdi Tantra, Ms. Deepa Soman, Mr. Milind Soman, and Nitin Orion. And they have such amazing bios. Please read about them on our website. So we have these as our supporters as well. Next slide. We also have this time an academic committee in alphabetic order. It was Abhilasha Khetan, whom you heard yesterday, Anaita Lee, whom you heard today, Beena Parekh, who is the principal of Harmony Montessori, and she's been a major support, Dr. Bindu Chowdhury, myself, Devika Chatterjee, again, whom you heard today, Donna, Harinder Sro, who gave us contacts of many of the speakers we've had during the summit, Jalpa Bitlani, Mahalakshmi Anand, Mahera Goyal, Preeti Takle, and Ruchita Dar. And Ruchita Dar brings in with her the parents because she is a CEO of First Moms Club. Next. That's an online group. I also wish to thank my social media manager, Charlene Bevaina, the design team at Lumiere Business Solutions, the organizing team comprising Shahrukh Bevaina and Dr. Nina Nair. You have been seeing Dr. Nina Nair on all 3 days. She is an amazing human being, again, believes completely in the work we do. And to just have to pick up a phone and say, Nina, you're going to compare this, and her answer is sure. So Nina, thank you very, very much for the wonderful work that you've done. 4 whole days, 3 hours a day, I know, but you've spent a lot of time thinking about it and comparing it so brilliantly. We also wish to thank our technical team, #Ventures, Mr. Dr. Nayan Beda, Vikas Matre, Abhishek Patel, and our friends from online, Ashish Kadam and Pezan Charna. Next. We've also had a whole lot of schools partnering with us, beginning with the Balsam Academy Vellore, Euro School North Campus Bangalore, Patak Polytechnic Trust Mumbai, Sanatan High School Bharatpur Rajasthan, Activity High School Mumbai, JBCN International School Borivali, Euro School Karabi, Besant Montessori Mumbai, and Learning Space Foundation Maharashtra. Next, please. Now, we invite schools to sign up for pilot testing of the PEGC framework. Once this framework is formulated, we want to test it out in 50 schools. So we would be very happy if you would come to us and say, and offer to be one of the pilot schools. Thank you very much. Next. You can see everything about us on GTPS for Change, our website.org. We will be announcing our upcoming webinars and workshops by experts. Several of our experts, in spite of being extremely busy, are so enthused by the concept of GTPS that they would like to offer you educationists a chance to learn from them. So I know several of them have already written to me to say that they will be happy to do so. Most seem to be free over weekends, so we'll try and organize that. Please keep checking on our website to know about our upcoming webinars and workshops. Next. Next slide, please. So all the recordings will be available in the resources section of our website. So if you missed a certain session, no problem, you can go back to it and listen to it. Also encourage people to go to our website because everything that we do is available on it. Next. Teacher Talk, and this is how it's spelled. This app is exclusively for teachers, created by the Dalvi Foundation, and they regularly announce intellectual engagements, workshops, and special discounts for teachers on products. So we would urge you to download this app if you're interested. And finally, yes, next slide, please. We've had so many people supporting us. The SSET, Society for Social Empowerment and Training, Tantra Tech, Shastri Indo-Canadian Institute, SR Dalvi Foundation, Lumiere Business Solutions, Teachers Help Teachers, Tata Trent Limited, First Moms Club, Ida Bro, which is Karen's, Wolves, and Penultimate. Next. We thank you and we hope to see you at GTPS 2023. Thank you all. Stay safe, stay blessed. Bye-bye.